Our next speaker is joining us in from Zoom. It's Stephen Alexander, who's a solution architect at Kainos, and he's going to be talking to us about what are the implications of moving towards managed services when you're a consumer and not necessarily a producer. So, Stephen, it's all up to you now.
Hey, hello. I'm Stephen Alexander. I'm a solution architect from Northern Ireland. I mainly work in public sector transactional services. So, like Peter said, I'm here to talk to you about the rise of managed services, the impact this has had on how we design solutions, and the new sort of things we have to consider. So, in the recent years, there's been a massive increase in the services cloud providers are offering and how they're linked together. AWS, Azure, Google, they all have a mature ecosystem of services which they use to promote their platforms, and they compete with each other by improving them every year. This has made it easier than ever to create solutions almost entirely without any VMs or containers, less costs, management overhead. But it has introduced some new concerns, and you should be aware of them and the ways to take the best advantage of this new approach to designing services. Okay, so when I say everything is available as a service, I mean everything. Caching, CI/CD, file storage, authentication, log aggregation, monitoring, data processing, data analytics, data streaming, security monitoring, event delivery, IoT event handling, notification, API management, natural language processing, image analysis. I mean, I could just keep going on. If you search on your cloud host services, you're going to see hundreds of results for products and services which previously you would need to spin up a VM and install yourself. With this, that means all the components you need to build your solution are available without needing VMs and containers. You can just spin up a managed service to handle that part of your solution and let the provider handle aspects like scaling and monitoring. And whenever you start to do this, you'll start to find whenever large parts of your service are managed, the parts that aren't are going to start to look risky and points of failure for your solution. And this pushes you to use more and more managed services. So starting with a common example of a managed service, you have database as a service. There are now many mature managed services for common relational databases like MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, as well as non-relational stores like Redis, Cosmos DB, DynamoDB. And they offer an extremely quick and reliable way to create data stores. You pay based on size, storage, transactions, while the provider handles scaling, backup, and recovery. And they do this to a high standard that's difficult and costly for most teams to achieve on their own. Frankly, these days, you need an extremely good reason to provision your own data store, as it's much more convenient, less risky, and cost-effective to use a managed store. Another one is authentication providers. Now, these services have been around for a long time, and they've evolved into extremely well-recognized parts of the modern web. Cloud providers have also got into this, making their own identity providers, which allow you to use them in ways that customize their appearance to users to match your solution while integrating with their other services, controlling users' access to resources. If your service requires login and user accounts, creating and managing your authentication service can require lots of effort to develop and maintain. Security is such a vital concern, and being able to do things like avoid holding personal information directly in your solution and offloading authentication into already accredited services can really help reduce risk to your project. On the other hand, having such a vital part of your solution tightly bound to an externally controlled service presents new risks. You will be living with the limitations and support of this service, and getting out of it once your users are using them can be extremely difficult. And a lot of these new services that are available aren't simply components that you would use in your solution. They're managed services that can help you develop and monitor your solution as you're creating it and once it's live. You have continuous integration services that you can use to build your code. Things like Travis CI, Circle CI, they can be used to provide build, test, deployment agents on demand, scalable based on your needs and team size. And there are even services which offer things like static code analysis, automated alerts for security risks on your code as it is being developed. And these are things which previously would not be practical to do on most projects. So when starting your project, think about other managed services which you can use to help develop your solution. You may find that this will help speed up your delivery process and offer new abilities to your development team. Let's talk about the advantages. Now, the big one is cost. Because you're able to create these services on demand, scaling them up and down based on your use without large maintenance overheads, it can be much cheaper than traditional hosting for your components. There are other cost benefits. Your development testing environments are going to be running with these services as well, reducing the cost overhead for these environments throughout your solution's lifetime. And the cost for scaling these parts of your solution comes for free. No more overhead for orchestrating and testing a way to scale out things like your database. Your operational management is also going to be more simple, as most of the managed services have good monitoring and logging, which often ties into the cloud provider's own standard monitoring services, which you may already be using. And finally, the time to get things from your solution into production is quicker. The lower overhead for getting started with managed services means you can develop, test, and push out your solutions faster. And this means less effort to provision production quality solutions. This low overhead and opportunity cost means that you have more flexibility to experiment more. You can try using a managed service for a need, then maybe later switch over to another one without paying the large overhead for figuring out how to provision it for your environments. Okay, but no service is perfect. So let's talk about the disadvantages you have to consider. Lock-in is a big one. Choosing a managed service on one cloud provider will provide some degree of lock-in to that host. Even when the product is not something specific to the host, say a common product like Rita is, your provider's tooling, monitoring, scaling, and version options will become intrinsically linked to your application. And this means you're going to have some lack of control. The provider is managing the service, not you. And this is both a benefit and a restriction. You won't have the same level of control over things like what version of the product you use or the ability to patch for a critical security issue on demand. Multi-tenancy and redundancy are issues. You can't always control where your services are going to run from or who else is going to be running on the same underlying servers. And this may be a legal or security issue for your solution. There are also going to be limits on services usage, documented or undocumented. And these may mysteriously change or be invented as they're discovered by your provider. So once you choose a managed service, you're going to be working within the limits of that service. The ability to change is going to be heavily restricted or linked to a roadmap that you have no say over. You will find that you're going to get the best benefits out of using these services working their way and not trying to do anything heavily customized. So, what are the sort of things you have to think about whenever you're designing and evaluating these managed services and components for your solution? First off is, what are the easiest aspects of your solution that you can use managed services for? Storage is often a good place to start, but depending on your solution, you may have other areas that make more sense to offload management of. The services you use may also provide on the cloud providers that your solution is going to use. If you have a preferred cloud host, you may want to restrict yourself to only services that on that host to take most advantage of common tooling and monitoring. And this can help reduce overhead and team upskilling. Your team skill set is also going to influence things as well. If your team members have experience and knowledge of a particular managed service or cloud provider's tooling, it can make sense to use them even if other services offer lower costs or better functions. And the opposite is also true. If your team has a lot of experience in managing specific components, it can make sense to focus efforts using managed services in other areas, as you're going to be less concerned about the risks and time needed for some parts of your solution. Now, experience of using a service can be a big advantage. Often, the quirks and limitations of managed services do not show up until you have really tested them in production, and not just a proof of concept. If possible, you should lean on other project experiences with new services. Also, it can sometimes be a mistake to try and use lots of new services at once, overwhelming your team with lots of new things to learn. Think about introducing services gradually so that your team doesn't have to get lots of new things working all at once in order to start development and getting functionality to production. And finally, data protection and security concerns should be considered upfront when selecting these services. You can find that even though a service is being hosted inside the EU, it may be replicating data worldwide, causing security and GDPR concerns. You don't want to be finding out something like that right before your production release or in security testing. So that's a quick run through of the implications for using managed services and some of the things you should be thinking about. I'm going to hand you back over to the conference now, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talk.